He is editor-at-large for The Spectator, Fox News contributor extraordinaire. Hello, Ben.
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you as always.
Ben, I would like you to comment on the Wall Street Journal story this morning that says Nikki Haley is having a surge. She's having a moment in both Iowa and New Hampshire, but Donald Trump's grip on rural America remains tight. He remains very far ahead in Iowa, ahead in New Hampshire with the surge happening. And so the only thing I think is viable is for Haley to finish second, other than a Trump win, which I think is almost inevitable, for Haley to finish second in Iowa, win in New Hampshire, and somehow get herself to the top of South Carolina. So there is a path. I just think it's down to that. Agree or disagree?
I do agree with it, but I'd also add one more point, which is that, keep in mind when people reference the fact that Donald Trump lost in Iowa before and that we've seen, these surges from other candidates who didn't ultimately win the nomination in recent years, several times in a row, in 08, in 12, and 16 in Iowa. That was a situation where it was the rural conservative voter essentially rebelling against what the suburbanites wanted in the party. Now the situation is reversed. DeSantis and Haley are basically duking it out over those upper-educated suburbanites, and that's something that's a different situation than what we've seen before. Donald Trump's grip is on those conservative rural voters, and I don't think that's going to be possible to overcome. In New Hampshire, obviously, the situation is much different. You have a more of a college-educated upper-class electorate. It's also one of the most secular states in the country by many measures, including Pew, and it's something that I think makes her a much more viable candidate there. But then you go to South Carolina, and I think that you could see the same situation play out, where Donald Trump has more of that conservative rural support, and Nikki Haley is left with essentially a smaller portion of the Republican electorate.
Now, I want to read something to you. John Ellis puts out news items every morning. It's the only Substack that I pay for, and it's because Ellis Items gets everything I need to read. And he quotes Peggy Noonan's column, which I haven't read at length yet, which the part he quotes in news items is this. It's by Peggy. Deep down, a lot of hardcore Trump supporters, and many not so hardcore, think it's all over. They love America truly and deeply, but think the glue that held us together is gone. Religion and Main Street are shrinking into the past, and in a Rite Aid, everything's locked up. School shootings, mass shootings, nobody's safe. Men and girls' locker rooms, race obsessions, a national debt we'll never control, China, Russia nukes, and cooked-up plagues. If they decide to do a mass cyber attack and take out our electricity for months, we'll never get through it. Once we would. I'm always struck, Peggy continues, by how many jolly, kind, cheerful, constructive Americans hold this sense of impending doom in their hearts and go cheerfully through each day anyway. That would be the Christians. But they figure if we're at the end times, he's the perfect, former President Trump, end times president. What do you make of that, Ben Domenech?
Well, it's something that I hear a lot from a lot of my friends who don't work within the world of politics, including, a lot of people who are small business owners and people in my neighborhood who I talk to regularly about these kinds of things. And I think that is an accurate assessment of a lot of people's attitude. At the same time, I do think that there is a bit of a generational divide there. One where, the younger you are, especially if you're from kind of the elder millennial, young Xer portion of the generations, I think that those people, having lived through as much strife as they have over the past 25 years or so, basically from 9/11 onward, you have actually a little bit more of an optimistic, hopeful attitude that once this current generation of leadership is absent from the stage, meaning on the Democratic side, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, and the rest, that there is actually an opportunity to right the ship. But a lot of them have the attitude of until that happens, there's nothing that we can really do except make an extreme choice, perhaps one that is justified by ideology or by what they view as a victimhood, a martyrdom for the deep state in terms of backing Donald Trump. But I do think that there is this kind of glimmer of once we get past this moment, once we have people who are capable of, finding their car, finding a podium, when they're supposed to be giving a speech, that things might be able to be restored at some point in the future.
I have just posted for you, Ben, so you can find it easy over on X on my site, The Fragility of Civil Society, written by Richard McKenzie, one of the best economists in America, Hayek student, won every award in the world, written lots of books. And The Fragility of Society is based on how quickly order can collapse. And, of course, if you live in Southern California, you see that a lot. And the jibe that Peggy got in about the Rite Aid drugstores, people can't avoid that. And inflation went up 3.4% yesterday, and we had a Biden administration official saying it's getting cheaper to buy a house. It did for like a week. It's, they're not living in the real world.
No, they are not living in the real world, and there's so many people who are trapped in their houses who would like to be able to be more mobile, to move to a different and a better economic climate, but they're stuck in it because they bought at such a high rate that they can't really afford to buy a different place and move their family. And that's something that I think is a true problem that a lot of Americans are facing that nobody's really talking about. It just the degree to which this White House is out of touch, it just amazes me, Hugh, that they get away with it. But the truth is, I think that they are the most they are in the thickest bubble of any White House that we have ever seen in terms of the lack of questions, the lack of basic questions delivered to him. And when you're taking, questions from the likes of Conan O'Brien, from taking questions from Ryan Seacrest, then you can get away with that. Even those interviews, though, were ones that really did not go well for the president, and that tells you something.
Ben, we're at war today with Yemen.
Yep.
We weren't yesterday. This is the first time in my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, that we've gone to war without a presidential announcement on television instead of written statement. Am I right about that?
I believe that you are correct. I mean, you could cut split some hairs here or there, but I think that you are correct about that. And in this situation, I think that there are very few Americans who could explain what's going on there. Now, of course, what you understand and what we all know is that this is essentially about 10% of the global traffic in terms of trade goes through the Red Sea, and you have about 20% of the container traffic. It's a critical situation in terms of trying to maintain the peace and security of shipping lanes that matter to people all around the world. It's why we have our allies assisting us in this as well. But the potential for this to break into a wider conflict in the Middle East, especially given how many hot-button things are happening there at the same time, is huge. And to not hear from the commander-in-chief on this at this moment cannot make anyone feel encouraged, particularly as it comes in the wake of this horrendous Lloyd Austin story, which seems to keep getting worse every time we get a new detail about it.
This brings me to the debate. One of the most astonishing things this week is that Donald Trump did a one-on-one with Martha McCollum and Brett Baier, I should say a two-on-one, for an hour. He had 4.2 or 3 million people watch. Jake Tapper, Dana Bash had a debate between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They had 2.5 million people. The NBC debate I moderated along with Lester Holt and Kristen had 7 million. They didn't talk at length in detail about the fact of what is going on in the middle. It's like not talking about Pearl Harbor if you knew Pearl Harbor was around the corner.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think that it's one of these situations where, we need to understand we don't want a repeat of the scenarios that we've seen happen in prior presidential elections, where the biggest questions that needed to be put in front of people weren't put in front of them because of the vagaries of the debate schedule and the choices that moderators made and the like. One of the reasons that it was so horrible, I think, last time around, that you had that scandal with the host from C-SPAN, who ended up, leading to, along with the COVID diagnosis for former President Trump, to lead to a canceled foreign policy debate. We never had a conversation about all these different things.
And I keep going. I like Dana. I like Jake. If they put Ben Domenech on that panel, I'll watch it. A lot of conservatives are not going to watch those two people ask questions. And they didn't ask this. Last question, Ben. I've been talking with senators off the record. They're closing in on a deal with Democrats on the border. It does not have 900 miles of wall in it. And I tell them point blank, unless it's notwithstanding any other law language appropriated and authorized and built by the Army Corps of Engineers, including Indian land, by the end of this year, I'm opposed to this bill. They got to have it. The fence is the signal, not the noise. And It's not about going under it, around it, or cutting a hole in it. It's about the signal. I just can't support anything without it. What do you think?
Well, I think that the reason that this became such a central part of this debate, Hugh, as you know, is that it is a binary. Either it exists or it doesn't.
Yep.
And that's what people want to know. They want to know that this exists, and then we can deal with the other questions involved. But until that exists, until that is agreed to, I just don't think that there's any point in continuing this charade that we are dealing seriously with any of these problems. And unfortunately, in Washington, you can get away with playing charades for a very long time.
This is the fourth time, Ben. On my show, I've been on the air 24 years. Fourth time Republicans have tried a comprehensive deal, and they never get it. It is the binary. If there's no wall, there's no deal, and it won't make it through the House. Am I right about that?
I think you definitely are right about that at this moment.
Ben Domenech, follow him on X at B Domenech. He's, of course, editor-at-large for The Spectator, Fox News contributor, friend of the program. Glad you're back this week, Ben.